shines on the stream. 'Tis the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, long may it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace. May the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us our nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto: in God is our trust, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to welcome you here to today's commemoration of the 25th anniversary, tomorrow, of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's also the 255th anniversary on November 10th of the birth of the poet Friedrich Schiller. But we're really here for a somewhat different purpose. That is the reason, that is the pretext. The real reason we're here is because a movement must begin to revive the United States and the true actual culture of the United States. Francis Scott Key's song, which we just sang to you in its entirety, was written by a man who himself was ambivalent about the War of 1812. And that's a useful thing to point out because it wasn't as though Key was the most dyed-in-the-wool war hawk with respect to that cause and that fight against the British until he witnessed that particular attack on Fort McHenry and wrote his song, not in a fit of patriotism, but in a fit of recognition of the truth. The important thing to understand about great ideas is that great ideas usually come about because they're necessary. They're created by people that find themselves in crisis. Many people like to talk about the idea of intellectual renaissances, but very few people point out that the word renaissance means rebirth, and to be reborn, you have to know you're dead first. You can't have a resurgence of culture unless you realize the depth at which you have actually sunk. This has been a theme at different times in American history of various patriots, including, for example, the Mathers, Increase in Cotton Mather, who pointed this out in the year 1690 about the United States. The United States that they knew, the great republic of the 1630s and 40s, had sunk beneath the heel of British oppression. And they began a movement at that time to create a resurgence, a renaissance, because of the death of the Republic of Massachusetts. They engaged in and conducted a great conspiracy. And that great conspiracy involved, in particular, a young man by the name of Benjamin Franklin, who was sent at the age of 16 to Philadelphia to begin organizing that conspiracy. And that was called the American Revolution. I take a bit of time just to point that out because some people who are familiar with some of us and what we do in our daily lives, those of us from the Schiller Institute who are associated with Lyndon LaRouche, know that we've often been referred to as conspiracy theorists. We are not conspiracy theorists, we are conspiracy practitioners. And the reason is that's how we all got here. That's why we do it, because it's a time-honored American tradition. That's what you do. The poet Friedrich Schiller recognized, however, that there's another problem that must be considered, and that is the greatness of the soul. He talked about the problem of the French Revolution and how great moments sometimes find little people. What we want to do this afternoon and evening also, for those of you who have the wherewithal to keep doing this after we leave, is we want to try to give you and everyone who will be seeing or hearing this presentation the opportunity to celebrate the idea that it is through beauty that one proceeds to freedom. And so we're going to move right into our program, and the first thing we're going to do is introduce a young woman who's here on behalf of the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture, which is co-sponsoring the event of today. This is Yaegy Park, violinist, and she's going to be performing the Adagio and Fugue from Bach's Violin Sonata No. 1 in G major. Yaegy? Well, we're going to now go to our keynote presentation. Let me now make a couple of announcements. I was sitting there with my heart in my mouth because I did not say, please turn off your cell phones. That was lucky. We got through. But please do turn off your cell phones for the, because we have a lot of music. Are we ready? Great. We're going right to our keynote, which is being presented by Helga LaRouche, chairwoman and founder of the Schiller Institute. Cue.
Dear friends of the Schiller Institute, 25 years ago, the Berlin Wall came down. And today, many people don't even remember that that was the beginning of the end of the Warsaw Pact, the communist system. And many young people don't have any memory at all and don't even know what an extraordinary moment in history this was. But this was one of the crucial turning points, potential turning points in history where everything would have been possible. It was the chance, when the communist system was defeated, to establish a true peace order for the 21st century. Now, I want to show you a very short clip from a documentary which we made about this period called The Lost Chance of 1989.
Filling the streets, demanding their freedom and the right to travel west. These demonstrations only grew stronger, and the people were no longer afraid to demand access to those inalienable rights of man that were still enjoyed by the West. Even though the Western system was crumbling under controlled disintegration, and the political leadership had become increasingly corrupt, elements of the West still maintained their constitutional commitments to human liberty. But after years of enduring the Soviet system, the people recognized that they no longer had to accept the conditions of that system, and they desired to be united with the West. In previous times, as with the revolts that took place in Hungary and Poland, the KGB and the military were brought in to round up resistance leaders, who in some cases were never seen again. Now, all eyes were on East Germany, the sole barrier between the West and the East, which was in complete upheaval. Would the Soviet military be brought in again to crush these demonstrations? Would the people end communism from the streets of Germany? Would this be the cause for another Berlin crisis? In the midst of this great uprising, a GDR minister announced that there would be new travel guidelines. The message was immediately misinterpreted and taken to mean that the borders to the West were now open. The border guards opened the wall and stepped down.
think you all have seen in the recent days these extremely exciting moving pictures from Berlin. You know that the borders between East and West Germany have been opened. And the wall in Berlin, while it is still there, has practically come down. When this happened on the joyful 9th of November, in the first evening, 100,000 people immediately came over from East Berlin to West Berlin to taste what the new freedom would look like. On Sunday, 3 million people came, and the stream has not ended since. Well, so also into West Germany, people came, they embraced each other, and you know, the people were so happy, and the West German people, they overcame all normal kind of behavior. They showed a tremendous hospitality. They opened champagne, they gave food, they invited people for dinner. People were climbing the wall from both sides. The Ode to Joy, the symbol of the fight for freedom, was sang on the most important street in Berlin, the Kudamm. And the Symphony of West Berlin played for free the 9th Symphony of Beethoven, and they performed 2 times the Magic Flute. Well, let me tell you, I think this is a genuine, real revolution. It's a revolution of agape, of love, of charity, not a revolution of rage. And as one woman from the DDR said correctly, Schiller in this situation proves to be the real revolutionary. And you remember the famous sentence in the Ode to Joy, all men become present. Now, as I said, you know, at that point, the openness of the population, not only in Germany during the period of reunification, but also of Europe in general, people were expecting dramatic changes for the better. And indeed, you know, the Schiller movement, the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche movement, we proposed at that time economic basis for such a peace order for the 21st century, which was first called the productive triangle, which was the idea to economically unify East and Western Europe through infrastructure corridors. And then in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we extended that program to become the Eurasian Land Bridge, which was the idea to connect the population and industrial centers of Europe with those of Asia through development corridors. Now, unfortunately, that program was not implemented at that point because you had the neocons in the United States and you had Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain, and they decided to use the collapse of the Soviet Union instead to go for the building of a world empire. But fortunately, over a year ago, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has announced the new Silk Road as the policy of China. And in the meantime, that idea has taken on a tremendous momentum among the BRICS countries, among many other countries in the world, who are building exactly not only the new Silk Road, what we proposed 30 years ago, 25 years ago, but you know, to extend that to become a plan for world development. So in that sense, I can say at the 30th birthday of the Schiller Institute and the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, we are actually quite happy that our ideas did influence what is now the majority of civilization, namely the BRICS countries and many other countries joining the new world economic order, which is building very quickly. But we said all the time that an economic program can only succeed if we combine it with a true cultural renaissance. Because as people are painfully aware in Europe and in the United States in particular, our culture stinks. It has gone down to barbarian dimensions, and the most obvious place where this is visible is the youth culture, where young people have absolutely no idea what a human being could be, and they mostly have a very bestial conception. And that is why, in a certain sense, it's a blessing that the Schiller Institute, which is now worldwide becoming more prominent because our ideas are being realized by many countries, that the Schiller Institute is called according to Friedrich Schiller. When I gave the institute that name, I did that 30 years ago because I thought that from all the people I know, all the philosophers, thinkers, poets, Schiller has the most beautiful image of man, because he is convinced, he was convinced, and he is convinced, he is because he's immortal, that every human being has a potential ideal person within himself or herself, and that it is the great task of its existence to bring that ideal inner person, which only exists as a potentiality, into cohesion with the real person in real time, in the real life. Now, obviously, that needs to overcome certain challenges, because Schiller already at his time was convinced that most people, rather than developing their entire potential, only develop one aspect, and therefore they more resemble crippled plants than full developed human beings. And therefore Schiller said, in order to become such an ideal person, the most important task is the development of what is called in German the Empfindungsvermögen, which is the idea to sensuously grasp the world and own it intellectually and emotionally in the fullest possible way. Because only if you have that quality of the Empfindungsvermögen that you can even have passion for the world around you. Now, passion is extremely important, because the ideal of man which Schiller put up was the idea that every human being could become a beautiful soul. Now, a beautiful soul, according to his definition, is a human being for whom duty and passion, freedom and necessity are one. Now, there are people who are moral, but they do their duty with a sort of bitter feeling, and you can see they really don't like what they're doing. They have to suppress their emotions to be moral. Now, Schiller said that is only for the slaves, for the knights, but not for us, the children of the house, which was his notion for the beautiful soul. For the beautiful soul, you have to be able to joyfully do what is necessary, to find your freedom in what reason commands, but not by suppressing your emotion, but by developing your emotions to the highest level, so that you can always blindly follow what your emotions are telling you, because they are educated so much to the level of reason that they would never tell you anything different than what reason commands. And only that way you can become a fully harmonious person, a person who develops all potentialities, all talents, and becomes truly a genius. Because Schiller also says the only person who is a beautiful soul is the genius who in a lawful way enriches the lawfulness by adding dimensions to it. Now, this is very important, because I'm convinced that the conflict right now, which exists very clearly between the Atlantic sector, especially the United States and the European Union on the one side, and the BRICS countries, which are going for the new Silk Road and the World Land Bridge, it has everything to do with the image of man. I have come to the absolute conviction that right now the leaders of the BRICS countries, Xi Jinping from China, Narendra Modi from India, Vladimir Putin from Russia, who is quite different than the many media slanders about him, all of these people, all these great leaders are trying to develop a world perspective which is not geographical. It is not in contradiction to the rest of the world. But this new Silk Road is an all-inclusive idea, and it focuses on the universal character of mankind. And it also focuses on the idea of emphasizing the best tradition of the other country. When Xi Jinping was in India a couple of weeks ago, he gave a perfect description of what are the high points of Indian culture, starting with the Vedic writings, the Upanishads, the Gupta period, the high points of Sanskrit writings, the Indian Renaissance. And that image of man is what we absolutely have to revive, because it is very easy to relate to the best culture of the other nation if you are self-confident about your own culture. And if you are not sure, then you have to bully people around, then you have to, play a big macho game. And the problem is right now that in Europe and in the United States, we have almost forgotten our great classical culture. Now, I believe that therefore the most important is that we combine a revival of great classical music with great classical poetry and painting and architecture and other areas of classical art to make clear again what is the moral and cultural foundation of the West. Because if we don't know what the values are of the West, how can we then relate to other countries and nations around the world? So therefore, reflecting on the 25th year anniversary of the fall of the wall, when the system came to its end, we are now in a similar situation. The free market economy is about to blow up completely. We are at an absolutely crucial transition of world history. And we absolutely must not again miss the great chance. And I hope that sometimes in the future, our children and grandchildren will look back and say, there were the people of the LaRouche movement and joining hands with the BRICS countries and many other countries in the world, and they did not miss the great chance of 2014.
We have one change in our program because of a schedule change for the person, which is that we're going to have Carlos Arcos sing now. If you can come up, Carlos. He's a graduate of the Foundation for the Revival of Classical Culture Summer Music and Science program, and he's also over at Queens College now studying voice. So he's going to sing, and if you look at part 2 of your program at the very beginning, you see the 2 selections, O del mio amato ben and Caro mio ben. While he's doing that, let me also announce that I know that we're talking to people about the Schiller Institute memberships. Has my friend, the Attorney General, shown up by any chance? Has he been here yet? Okay, fine. So, because he usually talks about the book people, but I'll make a little reference to that. We're the book people, and we'll tell you more about that, a little bit more about that after we hear our presentations. Maybe he'll be able to do it himself if he shows up. He lives down the street, so we may see him soon. Carlos?
Caro mio ben
Could someone help with the music stand? You need that, Mr. Thompson, right? The music stand? Mr. Thompson, do you want the music stand? Or? Yeah. Can Elliot, could you just help move that out? Some of you know that the Schiller Institute about 20 years ago had a sub-project called the National Conservatory of Music, Marian Anderson National Conservatory of Music. And many people worked with us then, William Warfield, Sylvia Olden Lee, the accompanist, Robert McFerrin, and others. And we did something at that time. Basically, it was a project to not just revive the African American spiritual, but also to show the unity between what's called classical musical style and the African American spiritual. And basically, almost everybody that we worked with back in that time is no longer with us. I heard this gentleman sing 2 weeks ago, and in talking to him, he knows a whole bunch of the people that we know and knew. And he's here, and he's going to do a few things, and his name is Harry Thompson, and he's a professor of music. He teaches down at Essex County College in New Jersey. Dr. Thompson?
I'm not dead yet. On the way. Sorry. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land, and I will shake, and I will shake all nations. I'll shake the heavens, the earth, the sea, the dry land, all nations I'll shake, and that is all the nations shall come. The Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple. He, the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. Shall stand when he appeareth? Who shall stand when he appeareth? But who may abide? But who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? And who shall stand when he appeareth? a refiner's fire, for he is like a refiner's fire. Who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, for he is like a refiner's fire. And who shall stand when he appeareth? But who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand? And who shall stand when he appeareth? When he appeareth. For he is like a refiner's fire, like a refiner's fire. And who shall stand when he appeareth? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire. And who shall stand when he appeareth? When he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire. For he is like a refiner's fire. Here's some more. Draw near, ye people, come to me. this day let it be known that thou art God, and I am thy servant, Lord God of Abraham. Oh, show toward this people that I have done these things according to thy word. Oh, hear me, Lord, and answer me. Oh, hear me, Lord, and answer me. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, oh, hear me, and answer me, and show this people that thou, the Lord God, and let their hearts again be turned. Oh, show this people that thou, the Lord God, and let their hearts again be turned. Lord, and let their hearts, and let their hearts again be turned. King Jesus lit the candle by the waterside to see the little children when they truly baptized. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. King Jesus lit the candle by the waterside to see the little children when they truly baptized. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. Oh, run along, children, and be baptized. Mighty pretty meeting by the waterside. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. Oh, run along, children, and be baptized. Mighty pretty meeting by the waterside. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. I parade all the day. I parade all night. My head got sprinkled with the midnight dew. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. Oh, run along, children, and be baptized. My pretty meet by the waterside. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb. Oh, run along, children, and be baptized. My pretty meet by the waterside. Honor, honor unto the dying Lamb.
You can't have a resurgence of culture unless you realize the depth at which you have actually sunk. This has been a theme at different times in American history of various patriots, including, for example, the Mathers, Increase in Cotton Mather, who pointed this out in the year 1690 about the United States. The United States that they knew, the great republic of the 1630s and 40s, had sunk beneath the heel of British oppression. And they began a movement at that time to create a resurgence, a renaissance, because of the death of the Republic of Massachusetts. They engaged in and conducted a great conspiracy. And that great conspiracy involved, in particular, a young man by the name of Benjamin Franklin, who was sent at the age of 16 to Philadelphia to begin organizing that conspiracy. And that was called the American Revolution. I take a bit of time just to point that out because some people who are familiar with some of us and what we do in our daily lives, those of us from the Schiller Institute who are associated with Lyndon LaRouche, know that we've often been referred to as conspiracy theorists. We are not conspiracy theorists, we are conspiracy practitioners. And the reason is that's how we all got here. Here to today's commemoration of the 25th anniversary, tomorrow, of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's also the 255th anniversary on November 10th of the birth of the poet Friedrich Schiller. But we're really here for a somewhat different purpose. That is the reason, that is the pretext. The real reason we're here is because a movement must begin to revive the United States and the true actual culture of the United States. Francis Scott Key's song, which we just sang to you in its entirety, was written by a man who himself was ambivalent about the War of 1812. And that's a useful thing to point out because it wasn't as though Key was the most dyed-in-the-wool war hawk with respect to that cause and that fight against the British until he witnessed that particular attack on Fort McHenry and wrote his song, not in a fit of patriotism, but in a fit of recognition of the truth. The important thing to understand about great ideas is that great ideas usually come about because they're necessary. They're created by people that find themselves in crisis. Many people like to talk about the idea of intellectual renaissances, but very few people point out that the word renaissance means rebirth, and to be reborn, you have to know you're dead first.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner
My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to welcome you.